This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. New month, new me. Just kidding. I'm still a shell of my former pre-pandemic self. Here's what we got for y'all. Tonight, the infection after the infection. How doctors and health experts are working to make sure COVID patients don't suffer another kind of sickness while in recovery. Then, veterans go to work to help boost the vaccine rollout. But first, here's what you need to know right now. Shipments of the new Johnson & Johnson vaccine started going out today. The FDA gave the shot emergency use authorization over the weekend. The first 4 million doses are expected to start arriving at vaccination sites as early as Tuesday. The company promised 16 million more doses by the end of March. That means a total of 20 million people will be able to receive the vaccine. Keep in mind, unlike some other major vaccines, this one only requires 1 dose. The shot has also proven slightly less effective compared to Moderna or Pfizer's. Still, health experts say it will be a valuable tool in fighting the virus.
What vaccine is better than the other vaccine? In order to be able to determine that, you would have to compare them head to head. This was not done. We have 3 highly efficacious vaccines.
According to the latest numbers from the CDC, roughly 7.5% of the US population has been fully vaccinated. 15% of the population has received at least 1 dose. But now there's a question of what comes after you're vaccinated. Yes, you'll be able to more safely be around people, which is huge, but will it be a return to normal? Not exactly, but the CDC is working on updated guidance.
I think you can clearly feel that the relative risk is so low that you would not have to wear a mask, that you could have a good social gathering within the home. Beyond that is going to be based on a combination of data, a combination of modeling, and a combination of good clinical common sense.
The $1.9 trillion relief bill is heading to the Senate this week, and the president wants it passed pronto.
We have no time to waste. If we act now, decisively, quickly, and boldly, we can finally get ahead of this virus. We can finally get our economy moving again. And the people of this country have suffered far too much for too long. We need to relieve that suffering.
The House passed the bill Saturday with almost all Democrats supporting and 0 votes from Republicans. It includes stimulus checks for Americans maxing out at $1,400, along with an extra $400 weekly for the unemployed. The bill originally included a federal minimum wage increase to $15 an hour, though Senate rules say that will have to be removed and handled separately down the line. Democrats plan to approve the bill using a process called budget reconciliation that only requires a majority vote. So if everyone votes along party lines in the Senate, Vice President Kamala Harris would be the tiebreaker that ensures it's passed. If the bill gets through the Senate with changes, it will return to the House for a different vote. After that, it heads to the president's desk for his signature. There's growing backlash against President Biden's decision not to seek punishment for the Saudi crown prince over the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. On Monday, Khashoggi's fiancée released a statement on Twitter saying it could send a signal that the crown prince can get away with murder. Last week, the US declassified a report that showed Prince Mohammed bin Salman approved the assassination of the Washington Post journalist back in 2018. While in office, former President Trump faced heat over helping the Saudi prince escape accountability. The Biden administration says it plans to impose visa restrictions on 76 Saudis involved in the murder and intimidation of Saudi critics in the US under a new measure called the Khashoggi ban. But President Biden said the diplomatic cost of directly penalizing the prince is too high. During an interview on CNN's State of the Union Sunday, the White House press secretary defended the move.
We believe there is more effective ways to make sure this doesn't happen again, and to also be able to leave room to work with the Saudis on areas where there is mutual agreement, where there is interest, national interest for the United States.
New studies suggest preventing secondary infection during hospital stays are especially important for COVID-19 patients in the hospital. Secondary infections happen when a person's immune system is more prone to bacterial infections. Newsy's Lindsay Thies spoke with 2 scientists researching the secondary infections and trying to find ways to stop them.
Each day a patient stays in the hospital, the risk of getting a secondary infection goes up by 1.3%. With COVID-19 patients, the average stay in the intensive care unit is about 2 weeks. Others with milder cases of COVID recover in 3 or 4 days.
Being in the ICU is definitely a risk factor for this.
A precaution that ICU doctors take to avoid any potential infections, giving antibiotics to fight off the bacteria that causes them. But about 70% of hospitalized COVID patients are getting antibiotics, even though antibiotics don't help cure the coronavirus. On average, only 10 to 15% of COVID-19 patients get secondary infections.
So that means a lot of people are receiving antibiotic treatment when they probably don't need it. We don't want to drive up the prevalence of this resistance.
Corey Detweiler at the University of Colorado is looking for ways to treat patients who become resistant to antibiotics.
If you have a patient who has an infection and the microbe that's causing the infection is resistant to clinical antibiotics, you might be able to still treat them if you can treat with a clinical antibiotic plus one of our compounds, because what our compounds do is make bacteria more sensitive to those antibiotics.
It's tedious work, like looking for a needle in a haystack. So far, she's screened more than 14,000 molecules. Her team has zeroed in on 3 with strong potential. It's a long game, too. Detweiler says it will likely be years before any molecules she discovers go through clinical trials and are made into a drug that someone would be able to take. But this work is much needed. It's projected these antibiotic-resistant bacteria-associated deaths could hit 10 million people annually by 2050. For Newsy, I'm Lindsay Thies.
The road to March Madness was damn near shut down, but hey, look at us. Who would have thought we'd actually get a tournament this year? Not me. Not exactly sure what a busted bracket is going to do with our mental health during a pandemic, but screw it. I'm going to fill one out anyway. Here's what's trending. March Madness is upon us, and as we've mentioned before, this year's NCAA basketball tournament is gonna look a little different this go-round. For the first time, the men's and women's teams will play out the tournament in their separate, centralized bubbles in Indiana and Texas, respectively. Last year's tournaments were canceled after the pandemic was declared a national emergency. It was the first time the tournament had been straight up canceled since it started in 1939. This year, to make sure things go off without a hitch, the NCAA will have to perform a delicate dance including multiple COVID tests of priority people, players, coaches, refs, etc., and requiring tracking devices for those same folks. A single positive test could throw everything off, though the NCAA hasn't said exactly what would constitute a complete shutdown. As for the fans, crowds will be limited at places where the games will be played, but as with most college sports tournaments, the capacity for heartbreak is unlimited. This year, we're celebrating 34 years since Congress declared the first Women's History Month in the US. It's a month-long celebration of women and their achievements, and an opportunity to highlight issues facing women and girls all over the world.
Women and men must mobilize together to overcome the remaining obstacles to gender equality. They must fight for an end to gender-based violence, for access to healthcare, for equal pay, and for equal participation in political life.
In case you didn't know, March is a pretty significant month for women's history. Title IX and the Equal Rights Amendment both passed the Senate in March of 1972, and the month-long celebration itself started with International Women's Day, which is March 8th. The Golden Globes had a few glitches.
Am I on? Is this on? Is this on? Alright, cool. Can you hear me now?
But what hasn't glitched over the last year? The technical hiccups didn't stop the first bi-coastal and semi-virtual Golden Globes from becoming a history-making event, though.
I'm speechless. Thank you.
Most notably, Chloe Zhao became the first Asian woman and second woman ever to win in the Best Directing category for her film Nomadland. And Andra Day became only the second Black woman to win a Golden Globe for Best Actress in a Drama for her role as Billie Holiday in The United States versus Billie Holiday. The anti-abortion movement saw a big boost under President Trump, but with him out of office, anti-abortion folks are looking for a new champion, while the abortion rights crowd targets new legislation. Newsy's Amber Strong tells us how the fight over abortions will happen at the state level.
For many in the anti-abortion rights movement, President Trump equaled long-awaited progress.
It is my profound honor to be the first president in history to attend the March for Life.
For those on the other side,
But today I'm about to sign 2 executive orders, and basically the best way to describe them, to undo the damage Trump has done.
the Biden-Harris administration brings a sigh of relief for abortion rights groups. Since taking office, President Biden has reversed the Mexico City policy, which kept U.S. dollars from funding healthcare providers in foreign countries that offered counseling or even referrals for abortions. And he ordered a review of his predecessor's rule on Title X, a move that led groups like Planned Parenthood to lose some federal funding. That's the reality with many of President Trump's anti-abortion initiatives. They can be easily undone, and exactly why Democrats in Congress want to use their newfound power to enact long-lasting change.
I myself had been an opponent of the Hyde Amendment long before I came to Congress.
One focus is to get rid of the Hyde Amendment, a ban on the use of federal funds for abortion coverage except in the case of rape, incest, or if the mother's life is at stake. It's not an actual law, but a provision that's been added to spending bills for more than 40 years.
The Hyde Amendment has burdened Black and Indigenous people and other people of color for decades, limiting access to abortion care for those enrolled in the Medicaid program, in the Peace Corps, military, and others.
Having the ball in their court isn't going to make things easier for progressives. In January, 200 House Republicans signed a letter vowing not to support any spending bills that eliminate Hyde. Even if it were to pass the House, they'd need 60 votes in the Senate, unless, of course, they got rid of the filibuster rule. Enter West Virginia's Joe Manchin, a Democrat who recently flexed his political muscle, all but killing the chance of a confirmation for the president's budget director.
He's been a voice of reason thus far when it comes to the legislative filibuster. He has said that he does not want to get rid of the filibuster, that he does not want to get rid of the Hyde Amendment.
Anti-abortion groups need Manchin to keep progressive policies at bay.
Our pro-life values are under attack. Thankfully, Senator Joe Manchin is standing strong for life.
So they're throwing their focus and a 6-figure ad campaign toward wooing the potential make-or-break voter. Anti-abortion rights groups have also set their eyes on the states. Recently, a South Carolina law that banned most abortions after 6 weeks was temporarily struck down by a federal judge. But it's not a loss for these groups who hope cases like that end up at the Supreme Court, where there's a 6-3 Republican-appointed majority. The judicial branch is part of the former president's legacy that will be harder for progressives to erase. Amber Strong, Newsy, Washington.
Many teachers want to get back to the classroom with their students, but not without certain precautions. A recent CDC study reported that teachers can play a big role in spreading COVID. The findings stem from COVID-19 cases in elementary schools in Georgia. The new findings are disconcerting to say the least for teachers all over the country who want to get back to in-person classes, but not without vaccinations. National reporter Dan Grossman has more.
Every day, you just don't know if you're going to be exposed.
Where Megan Young feels angst.
It's really difficult because you know that now I'm getting this protection, but others aren't.
Teresa Brown feels guilt.
A little bit, yeah.
And where Teresa feels guilt.
This level of cruelty and hypocrisy is just, it's disgusting.
Randy Weingarten feels impassioned anger.
This is where the rubber hits the road. Governors and school districts, if you want to reopen schools, prioritize teacher vaccinations so that there's less fear out there.
All three are educators at different levels of this dilemma. But we start with Megan, a high school English teacher in Florida who is currently dealing with the ramifications of her state's decision not to prioritize vaccinating educators as she sits in quarantine.
Teachers really want to be in classrooms with their students, but until teachers are vaccinated, they're going to continue to experience what I'm experiencing, which is I'm being forced away from my students.
Currently, the 26 states in red have prioritized vaccinating all teachers, according to government data compiled by Education Week, while 17 have not, that are in yellow. The remaining 7 have prioritized teachers based on either age or health.
We have friends everywhere, and all of us are like, well, how come you're getting it and I'm not getting it?
Teresa lives in Colorado, one of the 26 states that have prioritized teachers, and just got her second shot last week. She says it adds a layer of assurance she knows peers like Megan don't have.
There's no good way to put it. It just stinks. But we are where we are, and progress is better than nothing at this point, I guess.
Earlier this week, the CDC published a study saying teachers play a central role in spreading COVID in schools. The study followed 8 Georgia elementary schools and found that as COVID cases rose in those schools, infections per every 100,000 people in the counties where they were located tripled. After a teacher spread it to a student, the student would spread it out to those at home and beyond.
This is a matter of now using the bully pulpit and calling out this hypocrisy.
Randy says the connection is clear and means the inaction is infuriating.
If we want less fear out there, and we really care about having in-school learning with the fullness of our hearts being out there, and where we're not worried about bringing it back home, give us the vaccines so that teachers and bus drivers can have those shots in the arms.
I'm Dan Grossman reporting.
If you haven't done so already, feel free to give us a shout on Twitter using the hashtag #NewsyInTheLoop. My telepathy has been on the fritz lately, so thinking your positive messages to me ain't working right now. Veterans who wish to continue serving have new marching orders: help with COVID-19 vaccinations. National reporter Stephanie Stone tells us about how the appropriately named Veterans Coalition for Vaccinations is using technology to help in the fight.
After Hurricane Delta hit Louisiana in the fall of 2020, Team Rubicon was there to restore.
Team Rubicon is a disaster nonprofit that mobilizes military veterans to use their skills, experience, and education to help communities prepare, respond, and recover from natural disasters.
Just like it is in the military, there's teamwork, a mission, a goal.
Military veterans bring, immense experience, comfort in ambiguous environments that can help people that have been impacted by natural disasters.
Art Dela Cruz is the president and chief operating officer of Team Rubicon. Formed by a former Marine sniper, it began with a small team of 8. There are now 140,000 volunteers who come together for a cause.
It's another opportunity to continue to serve.
Now they have a new job.
Veterans from across the country are coming together to aid in converting vaccines into vaccinations. We know that vaccines don't save lives, vaccinations do.
To say that mobilizing takes a huge amount of coordination would be an understatement. These days, that coordination comes through technology. Justin Spellhog is the vice president of technology for social impact at Microsoft, and he's a veteran who helps organizations like Team Rubicon run their operations with cloud for nonprofit.
Brings the best of our trusted cloud capabilities to solve the most challenging processes and pain points that nonprofits have.
Things like fundraising, how to deploy volunteers, when and where, and how to run programs, all of that in one place. When it comes to something like Team Rubicon's Veterans Coalition for Vaccination, tech can streamline a big job.
Ultimately, these are really typically, chaotic events, and the volunteer system provides order to what can be a chaotic event and help those healthcare workers get those shots in the arms.
Spellhog says they're using that tech to help mobilize in the most underserved of America's communities. For Team Rubicon, it's all about supporting the healthcare system.
We understood that our veterans could have impact, and it's not necessarily in putting needles in arms. It's making sure that we can facilitate this process so when doctors and nurses show up, that we're vaccinating as many people as possible in a short amount of time.
They've already started working in a handful of communities across the country, and they're standing by, ready to deploy for more when called. I'm Stephanie Stone, reporting.
More than 300 people have been charged so far for their roles in the Capitol riot on January 6th. Now, authorities say they've identified a suspect who might have caused the death of Capitol Officer Brian Sicknick. Newsy's Alex Arger has the update.
Federal investigators are targeting a suspect they believe may be involved in the death of Officer Brian Sicknick during the storming of the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. The Associated Press, citing 2 sources, says the FBI has new video evidence that shows a man spraying a suspected chemical agent at Officer Sicknick before he later collapsed and died. It is unclear if the chemical, also sprayed at other Capitol Police, is directly tied to Sicknick's death, but the FBI is now seeking to identify and question the man in the video. This represents a new theory in the case. Investigators first thought the officer died from being hit in the head with a fire extinguisher, but as the investigation has gone on, authorities now believe he ingested a chemical substance. The New York Times reported that authorities are focusing on bear spray or another dangerous toxin. Sicknick's cause of death is yet to be determined. Capitol Police said in a statement Friday, "We are awaiting toxicology reports and continue to work with other government agencies regarding the death investigation." For Newsy, I'm Alex Arger.
That's it for us, gang. As always, thanks for watching. We'll be back for more in the Loop tomorrow, same time, same place. Top stories from Newsy are headed your way right now.